of you that are interested in different tools for land and asset management. So I appreciate y'all being here. And I'm Sherry Meeks. I'm with Sublette County Conservation District. I manage the REACH program and surface water program. And this fell into the district's hands. I don't know, I'll explain a lot more of that, but it was kind of a fun project and we hope that it continues.
Introduce myself?
Yes.
Hey everyone, my name's John. I work with Vence, we're the virtual fencing company, and I'm based in Denver. Just had a nice drive up this afternoon. Thanks for coming.
While you are little, down Big Piney, I was the guy that got to test these out on the cows, so we'll be talking more later.
I'm Amber Robbins. I'm a regional management specialist with the BLM office here in Haida.
Hey, everybody, Jordan Kiesler, habitat biologist with the Game and Fish, and yeah, just over the last couple of years, been helping us through forward this pilot project.
So John, I just met him in person at the Society for Range Management meeting in Laramie last week. Last Tuesday, and so he was very gracious to come up and provide us a little bit of information about Vence, which he can answer so much more of the questions that are technical, a lot better than I can. So I'm grateful that he's here, and we'll start with his presentation first.
Thank you again for having me. What I'll do is basically just give a very high level overview of the different components of the system, explain how it works before I hand it over to you here. I can tell you if it actually works in the field or not. And what we do at a very high level is put collars on cows like these, and then use sound and shock stimulus to influence where those animals spend their time in the landscape. So our ultimate goal is really just to provide a tool to producers that they can use to reduce the cost associated with labor and infrastructure, and then at the same time enabling the types of grazing that can improve range and ecology and minimize any impacts to wildlife. So we're not a prescription, we don't tell anybody how to use the product, it's really just another tool for the producer toolkit, not a silver bullet, something that you can absolutely use alongside any other things that you're using, like poly wire or wire, existing fencing. All right. So easiest way to explain it is there's three main components to the system. The first is going to be the collar that goes on the animal. The second is a base station that we use to create a network across the ranch, and that's what the collars communicate through. That's how we get data in and out of the collar. And then we have the herd manager software, and that's what the producers will log into on their desktop computer. And that's where you build your virtual fence lines and analyze any of the data that the collars are collecting. And right now it's pretty much just location data. So this is the collar right here. I would say it's I'm a little separated. Thank you. So this is version 2.5, I would say. Weighs about 2.5 pounds with a battery inside. There's a positive chain and a negative chain with a brake at the top. The chain is actually where the electric stimulus is delivered. The chain's double back through, and this past year we've attached it with a metal zip tie basically. It didn't work as well as we wanted it to, so going into next year we're actually going to use a locking carabiner. Works a lot better, it's quick and easier to adjust in the chute, which is really nice. We've gone through a couple of iterations of these attachment styles, so we'll be happy to explain that more. There's some D-rings on the back here. In the past collars, these have split out at 650 pounds of pulse force. An animal gets hung up on a T-post or a tree. But the next versions, it's going to be a little bit more rugged on the D-ring, and this is going to be the brake force at 650 pounds. So in case an animal does get hung up, you can just replace the top bracket and you don't have to get a whole new collar, which is nice. Inside, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. Most important components are going to be a radio chip, which talks back and forth to the base station. That's how we get data in and out of the collars. Data going into the collar is predominantly instructions for new virtual fence lines. Okay, thank you. And data going out, location data right now. There's also a GPS chip inside the collar, and that GPS is listening to the satellite to fix the collar's location. We're not actually transmitting information back and forth with the satellite, we're simply listening so that the collar knows where it's at. It's also a battery, looks like a D-cell battery, but it's purple. It's made by a company called Tadiran out of Israel. It's just a special energy dense lithium type battery. It's designed to be able to handle the hot and cold. We have a lot of folks that ask us about solar panels and rechargeables, and we looked at them, but solar panels we think are expensive, they get dirty, they break. And we really think there's limited efficacy in how much they're actually charging. And then if you have a rechargeable battery, it's actually bigger, it's more expensive, and it can't really handle the hot and the cold. It's not as energy dense. So if you have a really hot day, like your phone is on the dash of your car, it can drain the battery quickly. Same thing with the big rechargeables. So we just use this one-time use disposable battery because it can handle those temperature extremes. And the general battery life for most folks, grazing seasonally in Rocky Mountains, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, about 6 to 9 months. As you squeeze those animals tighter, they're up on those virtual fence lines more often. And it's not necessarily the sound and the shock that's bringing the battery in the collar. It's actually how hard the GPS is working. So let's say we have a big pasture, 5,000 acres, cows smack dab in the middle of it. We're going to take a GPS reading once every 30 minutes. And then as it gets closer to that virtual fence line, within 1,000 feet, we start taking a GPS ping every 10 seconds. And within 300 feet, we start taking a GPS ping every second. So as we shrink those pastures, you're up on those virtual fence lines a greater percentage of the time, and your battery life goes down. And when you're on bigger pastures, you're going to have battery life closer to that. So virtual fencing is a very important concept. It's less like a hard line in the sand where you're very clearly in and very clearly out, and it's more of a pressure zone. We think about water pressure, heat pressure, herd pressure, topography pressure, and that's just another layer of pressure that we can artificially control the timing and location of. So we want to get away from the idea that we're joysticking the cat across the ranch. We certainly aren't. We're just using another layer of pressure. And the more that you understand what your animals want to do naturally, and you layer events in on top of that, the better success and advocacy you're going to have. And this is what a virtual fence line looks like on the computer here. So the white and the red is the virtual fence line. The blues you can just ignore. White is a sound zone, which is 15 yards wide is the standard setting. And the red is the sound plus chunk zone, which is 75 yards wide is the standard setting. So what that looks like is when one moves into the sound zone, they get an audio beep, cues them to turn around and return to the herd. We go through a training period to teach that to the animals. And then as they continue on, it's the sound plus mix stuff. So they get a beep plus a shock. And there's some timeouts for animal health safety in case they get hung up, confused, or anything like that. This is also set up as a one-way gate. So let's say you're trying to keep your animals in here, they're going to get pressure on the way out. And this is, 300 feet or so. But if they get onto this other side here, maybe a calf pulls them out as a storm or something like that, there's actually no pressure on the other side, so no sound of shock. But if they want to turn around and return to the herd, they can actually come back through this virtual fence line the opposite way. No sound, no shock, but as soon as they're back on the inside, the virtual fence line turns back on. So we call that one-way gate with passive recapture. It's a good standard design for a virtual fence, but it also allows you to do a whole bunch of interesting stuff from a rotational grazing perspective. We can also do exclusion zones. Let's say you have a riparian area or a burn scar and you want to keep the animals out of there. We can simply layer on the virtual fence line along it, same sort of thing. Animal goes down into the creek, they get pressure to turn and get out. That works really well, actually. Next up is the base station. This is a really important component of the system. These are the Spanish Peaks down in southern Colorado. We put up a base station at a nature conservancy property down there, really nice day. But this is what we use to create the network across the range that the callers communicate through. And I like to think of 3 components in this system as well, big mission 3. So first one at the top is going to be the LoRa antenna installed. And that's just an acronym for the type of radio technology we use, long range, wide area network. It's basically low power, low data. It's what allows us to put a collar on an animal and have that collar's battery last 9 months and the collar still does what it needs to do. So very low power, low data, and we create our own network across the range that the collars communicate through. Next up is this antenna here, and that's our cellular backhaul. So we connect to either Verizon or AT&T, and that's the bridge between what's going on with the callers and then your ability to access that information through the internet. We don't need cell coverage across the entire ranch. The callers don't need it by any means, but we do want to cell signal specifically where that base station goes. And generally, we put the base stations up high on top of peaks in Colorado or on top of bluffs that are in the plains. And that's generally what self-service is anyway, so knock on wood, we've been pretty successful, even in some more remote and rugged areas, connecting to self-service. And all we really need is one bar that's stable, enough to shoot out a text pretty consistently. And it's been good for us in the States, and importantly, it's cheap and it's super reliable. So that's our preferred backhaul method right now. It's also a power system, solar panel inside with all the electronics and 4 batteries. They look like total full car type batteries. So batteries power the electronics, solar panel trickle charges the batteries, and we can deploy this wherever we need to. It's just a question of, can we access that site? Do we have permission to put a base station there? And then do we have cell connection? So those are the main questions that we go over when we're doing an RF plan. And the question of how many acres it covers it totally depends. Tricky question. So what we do is an RF plan. For example, this is a Forest Service allotment outside of Carbondale, Colorado. It's actually a ski resort on the corner on the right. So it's pretty mountainous, pretty rugged terrain. And we'll do a mapping like this for every project that we work on. The range on a base station is really good. It's about 10 miles we model out to, but we can't violate the laws of physics. So we can't go through a mountain or down to a gully. So it becomes the question of where do we put them and how do we combine base stations to fill in all the shadows that we got from this base station to kind of like a permutation, a combination of base stations. And what we'll do is fly around on Google Earth, exaggerate that elevation ×3 so we can really tell what the topography is doing. High points to get the most bang for your buck, maybe cover the most acreage. And then we'll run a bunch of different pins, and we'll take the GPS coordinates, we'll plug it through a tool called Cloud RF, all the radio stuff in there, DPMs and all that stuff, and it'll spit out these projected maps, what we expect to get from coverage. And green is really good, blue is where things starts to trail off a little bit, but still functional. And these orange dots are those proposed base station locations. So I think there are 5 on this one right here for the projected coverage map. And you'll see, we don't actually cover the entirety of the lot. We want to get as close as we can to 100%, provides a better experience, more consistent data, faster update times for the callers. But we designed the system knowing that in the American West, really rugged topography, we're never going to have perfect coverage across the entire range. So you can actually still run virtual fence lines through areas that are dead zones here. So you can see down in canyons, we don't have coverage there. But if you wanted to run a virtual fence line, say kind of south to north, through the green, through the dead zones, as long as you download the information for the virtual fence line into the caller gives you the thumbs up and says, hey, I'm good to go. It can actually go down to those areas where you don't have coverage. And because it has that virtual fence line stored in its memory, and because it's listening to the satellite to fix its location, you'll still get the sound, you still get the shot just like you're supposed to, which is really nice, especially where we're running in really difficult terrain. What you won't get, however, is the location data coming off the caller or the ability to make a change to that virtual fence line. The caller is actually still sending out these messages. We're just not there to receive it. And since we can't receive it, we can't send a new instruction to that caller. So the flexibility and adaptability in the data of the system goes down, the less base stations we have, and the flexibility and adaptability goes up, the higher quality network we have. And we plan around that because there's kind of 2 ends of the spectrum. Some folks that are looking to move tags often, get tons of data, make update speed really quickly. In that situation, you want really good coverage. And there's other folks that turn out to 60,000 acres that move their cows twice a year and they're trying to protect a creek. In that situation, we can get away with less base station coverage. It's just a very different experience for the producer and the software. On that second example, they may get a location data point update once a day, in a really bad situation once every couple of days. And if they want to send new instructions to that caller, it'll take just as long, a day or 2. On the other end of the spectrum, really good coverage. That customer will get an update on the caller probably once every 30 minutes or an hour. So not real-time data, but pretty close. And if they want to send a new instruction to that caller and update so they can move those animals or rotation graze, they'll typically pick it up within an hour or 2. So much faster, flexible system. Both work though. Last up is the herd manager software. So what you log into on the desktop computer, basically build the virtual fence lines, analyze any location data. You can make your pasture a different color, have gates, water sources, that type of thing. That's just so you can see what's going on in the software. Doesn't make any changes to your virtual fence lines. We're also going to get your cow icons here, and those are your location data points. And you can change those to different color schemes to mean different things. For example, does this collar have the most recent update that I sent it? Or is this location data point 30 minutes old, or is it a little stale at 12 hours old? So different ways to visualize what's going on in the software. And we also have historical data and location points. You can run it back as like individual points, or you can run it back as a heat map. This is actually pretty cool. You can look at an individual collar or the whole herd, and you can see where those animals are putting pressure on the landscape. Right now, it's just based on location data points. So if the animals are ruminating or sleeping, you're still going to get those points. I think in the future, what we want to do is have an accelerometer in the collar so we can tell when they're actually grazing. And then this is more of a grazing heat map. So we can really tell where the animals are putting pressure on the landscape and where they're not. And make decisions like, do we need to push them up into the northeast corner, or are we really beating up this riparian area and we need to think about fencing it out? So different ways to utilize the data. This is where we're at in North America. You can see predominantly the American West. We're built as a rangeland management tool. About the tightest you're going to want to manage your first year in particular is down to about 100 acres. There's a little bit of fuzziness to that virtual fence line, that pressure zone that I mentioned based on the GPS accuracy. So that's why bigger acreage is generally what we're a good fit for. We don't do anything in the Northeast, like that super tight stuff. Hudson Valley, you know, more farm type stuff. We're very much built for American Western rangeland management. We were founded in 2016. We had a running pilot program for 3-4 years after that. One was up in Montana, other in Oklahoma, and the third was near the San Diego office for engineering, so we could test stuff in the field. And then at the very beginning of 2022, we went commercially available, went from couple $1,000 in the field to closer to 30 or 40,000 as of now. So we've grown quite a bit and really exciting. One big thing for us was that we were a venture-backed company, meaning we were raising money, going out and raising money, selling dollars, and Merck Animal Health was a minority investor in us, and they were going to lead our Series B round. We're going to raise $50 million or something like that to go and grow the company. And they saw an opportunity to purchase us outright. So now we're in Merck, and it's actually been really good. I was wondering, you know, not coming from an ag background, not knowing much about Merck, I was wondering whether or not it was going to be a good situation coming later, and I've actually been really pleased. It's been nice. One of the main benefits is we're not under as much pressure to go out and selling as many collars. Under a venture model, they want you to sell, like this, 200,000 collars, which we don't have the team to do. They're just used to software companies that grow really quickly. So one of the main benefits is we're under less pressure, so we can pick and choose the right customers, the right fit, the right time, decided to work with us, the right use case, which is really important for laying a good foundation for the groundwork as we continue to develop the technology, because it's still new, it's not without its warts, it has its challenges, but it's also been really, really exciting. So pricing on the system is pretty simple right now. Base stations are fixed infrastructure. You purchase it, you own it. There's no recurring fees. It's 10,000 for a self-install, which I'd say the majority of private producers will do. And it's 12,500 if you want us to come out and help you. We'll send one of our guys, we'll bring all the tools, but you still help us get it up and site, help us build it, show us where it goes and all that. But we'll confirm functionality, set everything up, and make sure it's looking good. Callers themselves are on a subscription model. So it's $40 per caller per year, and that includes all the software, all the customer support, and includes a working caller. So if you guys have an electrical failure, mechanical failure, something happens, the caller falls off, you can't find it, we'll just replace it right now for free, which is really nice. And the subscription model is great, especially as the caller is continuing to develop. This is version 2.5, but there's Red A, Red B, Red C, Red D, we're all the way down to Red G on these callers. Some of those changes you'll be able to see on the surface, some are internal, and you can't quite tell, but the collar is rapidly developing. So it's nice to have a subscription model where you can change out to the latest version of the collar rather than purchase outright. It costs a lot more than $40 right now, so that's a benefit as well. And the batteries themselves are just $10 a pop, purchase those as needed. I'd say most folks grazing seasonally are one battery per year, but some folks, if they're grazing in the winter as well, are looking at 2 batteries. So ROI in the project, originally at the inception of Vence, I think the idea was we're going to rotationally graze, we're going to increase the quality and quantity of forage, we're going to increase stocking density, and that's going to pay for the collars. And we still believe that's going to be true. we're gonna do all sorts of case studies and whatnot, and continue to push on the rotational grazing side, but there's a whole bunch of other ROIs, and it's really honestly very specific to the individual operation. Not coming from an ag background again, I was amazed at how different each individual operation is and how different the people do things and how different the problems that they're looking to solve are, which has been really, really cool to see. We could make the case for, ROIs on this individual operation, but some of the common ones are fencing is really expensive, especially in the mountains. Colorado's $15,000 or $20,000 per mile in forest sometimes, which is really tough, especially if a fire can come through and take that out after you sunk all the infrastructure into it. Or maybe you get too many trespasses and you lose your permit. You can't really pick up 5 miles of fence, but which is nice, you can take the base station, you can take the collars and move to another permit. So that's one of the benefits as well. We also reduce gather times, especially if we're on big acreage. And then there's some other examples, especially with agencies and wildlife. It's a little bit harder to put a quantitative ROI on, but the story I typically tell is up in northwest Colorado, Dan Camblin. There's a piece of ground called the Bitter Rush. It's about 20,000 acres or so. And the family actually used to own it, but they sold it to CPW in the 90s, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and they started to manage it. And Dan had just got the opportunity to graze it again in permit just a couple of years ago. The only issue is there's a whole bunch of pronghorn, as well as a bunch of sage-grouse. And Dan is pretty progressive, so she moves her animals often. She runs hot wire, really soil health minded, and she wasn't going to be able to do what she wanted to do with the wildlife impact. And CPW wasn't going to let her. So what they did instead was bought a couple of base stations, put collars on animals, and now Dan is able to rotationally graze past the bitter brush. They get really good grazing pressure, and CPW is super happy because there's no impact to the wildlife on the sage-grouse. So, cool example. That's definitely value for both parties involved. I don't know how to put a dollar amount on it, but super cool. We have a lot of examples like that. So what we're continuing to work on over the next couple of years is really just this collar, called blocking and tackling. Good virtual fencing, good retention. We're trying to get the battery life to a year plus at the minimum. So those are all the things on the engineering side that are going to occupy our time over the next couple of years. Plan is to sell about 30,000 more collars next year, put those into the field, probably represents maybe 100 or 150 more customers, which is manageable and good for us, especially with the size of the team that we have. Super exciting. And then long term, which is exciting as well, I think that virtual fencing is a really good use case that justifies the cost to get the device on a ranch. And then all of a sudden we can do all sorts of other interesting things like heat detection, catting alerts with that collar that's out on the ranch, and do some things that maybe we wouldn't have insight to otherwise. So I think that's the long-term plan. That's not going to happen in the next year or two, but certainly long-term vision. Some of the earlier stuff that will happen, this collar has a sticker on it with that ID tag, and you can imagine it gets rubbed off really, really quickly. So sometimes people put Sharpie IDs on it so they know which collar it is when they're looking at the software, but that gets rubbed off pretty quickly as well. Some of these collars come back pretty beat up in the field. So next year, we're going to use the collar, the plastic's already on here. It's going to have an RFID tag, so you can have a wand, you can beat the collar and see which one it is, which is nice. You also have the option to identify which collar is associated with which animal in the software based on ear tags. Right now, you just type it in manually, but with the all flex ear tags, it's kind of like a Merc thing. You're going to be able to, in the future, beep the ear tag, beep the collar, it'll associate it to you automatically in the software. So changes like that are a little bit sooner, which is nice. Then some nice and cheap trials, but for the most part, this is all engineered and focused around cows for the next couple of years. We did put about 50 collars on bison in a nature conservancy property. We did put collars on sheep out in Australia. Bison tend to run through pretty quickly. Works really well at first until they find out that the pressure zone isn't that wide. But it went really well with the sheep. So I think long term is going to be different ruminant species, but it's all about fitment and then tailoring things and making tweaks for those individual species. So that'll come in time. The main focus next couple of years at least is going to be cows. And that is pretty much what I have for you guys. That's again high level overview. So more than happy to open up for questions after everybody gets through. We can get into more of the technical stuff and those types of questions. And if anyone ever wants to chat, I'm always happy to. If my email, if my cell phone, and all that. Thank you.
So thanks, Cameron. So today, obviously, you're here for the virtual Vence open house, and we're pretty grateful that everybody's here. My presentation is split with Wayne here in a minute, and we're just gonna give you a pretty broad overview of our virtual Vence pilot project that was implemented during this field season. We all live here in Sublette County for the most part, I think of all of our attendees. This is a pretty complex place to operate if you have a livestock operation. Not only is land ownership complex between state and federal, private, and others, we have riparian areas that, based in a lot of our arid situations, we have the little mesic meadows that can get grazed pretty heavy during the field season or grazing season. And then also our riparian areas, we don't have a lot of perennial access to water. And where we do, it tends to be where the livestock water and also our wildlife in the water. But then also they become some of our hardest hit lands here in Sublette County. We have changes in precipitation that vary widely, and temperature also that vary widely depending on where you are from place to place here in the county. Our plant communities vary widely in terms of productivity and what you can expect from them. We have wildlife parturition areas, some are in ranges. We have all kinds of things on this landscape that are begging from it. They're all needing something, right? And we also have the human aspect. We have a lot of public land users, from recreation to well, mostly recreation, photography, four-wheeling, all of those things. Not only that, we have disturbance from wildfire, and the larger the wildfires get, the more we need to get creative about putting livestock back on those burned areas, when and how. We have cheatgrass that we like to potentially manage with grazing. And then reclamation areas that could probably do better if we were able to defer grazing from that. We have a lot of varied livestock veg and management techniques across the board, right? John hit that right on the head, like every operation functions slightly different. And so that makes it really unique here in Sublette County, right? Because we want to be stewards. I don't think there's anybody in here that wants to see anything break and pillage, right? Because that's not what we're in the business for. That's not sustainable. And not only for that, for our wildlife, but for our livestock. So I think the case in Sublette County is the same. I think we're all just looking for more tools in our toolbox, right? We have electric fence and things like that we can do to manipulate our livestock management, but we can also use virtual fence as that option as well. So today our pilot project is located down in the southwestern corner of our county. And I'll go into a little bit more information. In 2016, and I was asked by the BLM to come participate. Of course, these conversations have been going on a lot longer than just since 2016, but here I just want to isolate us down to our project area, right? Like in the North LaBarge area, if you were to go stand on the mesa, you don't necessarily have the complexities of the precip changes and the veg changes and things like that. North LaBarge lends itself nicely to being a very complex location in our county. And land ownership is one of those things. In 2016, we started a cooperative monitoring project with the permittees down there. And then from there, we kind of snowballed into this, and hopefully I'll paint that picture for you. Some of you may be familiar, but down in North LaBarge, we only have, we have the Green River, which is not in the project boundary. We have South Piney, Dry Piney, and LaBarge Creek, which are also perennial. Dry Piney is kind of perennial in certain instances. The yellow dots are all the springs, but all the rest of those are pretty much ephemeral drainages. So we don't have a lot of water that's live, and where we do, those riparian areas are rather isolated and are a treasure on the landscape. And then on the map on the right, those are the precipitation zone changes, right? So in this particular area, on the eastern side of the allotment, you go from 7 to 9 inches of precip all the way up to Deadline Ridge, which is well over 20 inches of precip. And that, as the crow flies, is like 15 miles. And so that makes this quite complex in the landscape. And a lot of that then results in the plant communities that I talked about just a second ago. From the left to the right, that's low precip to high precip, and you can see the difference in the productivity on the landscape. And so from that, we could alter our livestock densities, right? We could change up our carrying, or not carrying, our stocking rates on different areas if we had maybe a little bit more tools to help us do that. Not only that, we have on the left map is all the big game winter range. We have a large concentration of mule deer and pronghorn that winter down there and summer down there. There's elk that use the area quite a lot and moose as well. And then just the complexities of the red, the largest part that's red is the North Large Common. It's a common allotment over 100,000 acres in that, but then not only that, those permittees also manage several of those individual allotments. And so managing livestock inside and outside of all of those individual locations can be complex sometimes. And last but not least, all the surface disturbance. The big red blotch up in the upper left-hand corner is the Fontenelle fire that was happening in 2012. And the rest of that is oil and gas disturbance. Not all of that is reclamation, but it shows that there's about roughly 10,000 to 15,000 acres that have been disturbed for some type of disturbance. And that's not including the cheatgrass areas that are down there that we could be managing for. So part of what came about our cooperative monitoring project is that not only did we establish vegetation monitoring throughout the allotment, but we also were working on revising their allotment management plan. And with that, the one large pasture here originally had been designed really to have 4 sub pastures within it so that there could be allowed for deferment and or rest eventually. And what we found out is that that's just one of the pastures, but all of the pastures could benefit from some sort of subdivision of them. But as we talked with our partners, several of us at the table, from Game and Fish to NRCS, Forest Service, and BLM, we all just kind of came up with the honest reaction to all that is like, no more fences on the landscape. It's too sensitive. 1, vegetatively, but 2, the wildlife, all the migration and things like that. So so that's kind of how we got to where we are today is this seems to be an alternative that was worth trying with all the pressure and all the necessity that resource managers and permittees could see. This might be a good way to balance some of that. Just from its wildlife habitat perspective, new fences aren't ideal in Sublette County, I guess, depending on where you are. We needed to be able to achieve deferred rotation or rest rotation. That's still something that we need to try to achieve. And then just trying to respect those land ownership boundaries to avoid those trespass issues. So as a part of our project, the funding was provided by 2 sources here in Sublette County. One was the Jonah Interagency Office that provided some offsite mitigation for the Jonah, the JI plan, and then the Wyoming Mule Deer Habitat Project that's cooperatively done between Game and Fish, BLM, and folks. And so we have the Game and Fish, the BLM, because we were going to be testing it out on BLM lands. The Conservation District helped to facilitate the contract and the acquisition of the materials, and then producer Wayne Barlow. So where did we have collared livestock? We put them out on 440 acres of private lease, 1,100 of private owned, and then 4,100 of BLM, which is slightly construed because really the pastures, like this stub unit up here is a part of a much larger pasture that's 15,000 acres. So theoretically, we applied virtual fencing to far more acres, but the cattle graze were contained within that unit. So in preparation for grazing season, we submitted our land ownership boundaries to Vence. And then we determined our equipment needs and then we ordered it. All of the things were shipped to the conservation district and from there we built towers and moved down to Colorado Cow. Initially, John touched on this, that we had an RF plan that was created for the entirety of the North of Arch Common allotment. And the black dots are potential tower locations. And what we really determined is that 8 towers would probably get us the coverage that we need. So 8 of the 10 or whatever that are up there would be probably what we would need if we wanted to deploy this on the entirety of the allotment. Because the acres that we were able to, the 5,600 acres that I showed in the previous slide, we actually moved some of those tower locations to facilitate that. But Vence does create these for every project individually. We just built the towers in our shop, and one of the big differences between our towers and the towers that John was talking about is it's the same tower, but we just put ours on trailers. And probably long term, if you really did want to apply this on your property or whatever, you might want to do maybe a combination of both stationary towers and mobile ones. But regardless, we bolted them down to the trailer, and then there's jacks on the trailers that go down to help stabilize that. That's just the internal components that communicate with the cell towers. We just set up a train in our lab and we just put together the collars. And then we deployed. Let's see if I can get this to play. So it's pretty easy to put them on, even with like just a little. What's that called? Oh, the metal zip tie?
Technically a cargo.
Yeah. It doesn't take a whole lot. I think it added, what did we get it down to, like 30 or 40 seconds per cow? That it added. And then we deployed the towers, and you're not supposed to have a human on those, I understand, but we're finishing that. And so basically that's what it looked like, deploy the jacks down and the tower up. And then we went into the grazing season implementation. So that's where Wayne we handed it all off to Wayne to kind of work with the rancher success team and train his livestock and tell us what he thought of it.
And you can probably see a decrease in the speaking ability here, so, and computer ability. Okay, so. Go to the next one. Okay. Okay, so John had talked about the training and how we did that, and what you do is you set up your pasture. So this white line here is an existing fence that goes all the way around the place where we train the cows. And you start out by putting this virtual fence just like 10 yards inside the fence, where they actually go to the fence and they get shocked and they learn to back away from there because they got nowhere else to go because of a fence. So the next day you move it in a little further. The third day you introduce this white zone here, which is the audio only, so they just get an audio tone, whereas before they were getting an audio with shock. So hopefully they figured out when they hear that tone, they better turn around or they're going to get shocked. And the fourth day, which is what this picture is you cut the pasture in half to where they don't have a fence. There's no fence here for them to use for a backup. It just keeps them from going to the other part of the pasture here. So that's the fourth day of the training, and that's how we set that thing up. And then the next picture we got, so this is a video from the same picture you saw previously. These are the cows on the day that that Vence was turned on. And they're not supposed to be in that lower part down there by the houses and the water towers. That was where it was supposed to be off limits. So that's the day that the virtual fence was on. That was the only day that it was on. So the other days prior to that, they could go down there, and they normally go down there all the time. And when we get to this next slide over here, you'll see this was the day that the virtual fence was on. And they were not supposed to be, or this is the day that it come off. So you can see them down there now as compared to this one. That's their normal distribution in that field. This one here is when the virtual fence was on and they were not supposed to be down there. So it does work. Okay, and one of the deals, we put it on both yearlings and we put it on cow-calf pairs. And part of the deal with the yearlings is we were going to try to do a rotational grazing thing, which is supposed to be one of the big benefits of this. So we had it set up, the yellow area is the same as what you were seeing before as red. I just didn't know how to turn it red. But anyway, they were all supposed to be in here and they were all inside of here. I figured they could stay in there for about a week before I needed to take that down and let them go somewhere else. After a day, that many of them had gotten out and the others were still in. And I don't know what happened. Where this pasture is, on the north is irrigated hay meadows and the town of Marbleton on the north side. On the east side is Highway 189, and on the south side is Big Piney and all backyard back there. So it's close to town. I don't know if the dog got in there, run them out. I got no idea why they left. They did, but I did leave that virtual fence up for the full week, and the ones that were in there then, when I did this, stayed in there. They did not leave. So I don't know what pushed them out the first day. Something happened and run them out of there, but the rest of them stayed in there like they were supposed to. And another thing we want to do with these yearlings is, like I said, I got town on the north, highway on the west or east, and another town on the south with about 50 backyards. And it's been a constant battle 3 or 4 times a week. We'd be called to go put cattle in, we'd be getting out somewhere, and they're on the running path or wherever, Obo's parking lot. I mean, they've been everywhere. So what I did is I set the virtual fence up all the way around that pasture, like it was a training fence, where I just had it set up like within 10 yards of the perimeter fence, where they would get the shock to try to keep them from getting out all the time. And that worked very well. All summer long, I went and put in 1 yearling steer that got out in the creek where I didn't fix the fence. After high water, the bottom 2 wires were gone, so the bottom wire was 4 foot above ground. And 1 steer walked out the creek underneath that, and that 1 steer that got out had lost his collar. So without that, every other one of them, I never put 1 yearling back in all summer long. So that was a big success for me, and I don't know how you go about putting a value on being able to go home at night or go out to dinner or whatever you want to do and not worry about having to go put cattle in every day. So that worked out very well. So next we've got, so this is out in the pasture Sherry was talking about. So the white line again is a pasture fence, basically takes in 15,000 acres. The south side of the green part up there is the cow pet highway. And we tried to keep them north of there. And it worked pretty well. They have some that leak through. Some of these old cows that know where they're going, wanted to go somewhere else, and they would for a ways. One of the things that drew them back in was the water for quite a while, would make them come back inside there. So they didn't get gone too far, but the majority of them stayed in there pretty close. As you can see, there's a little bit of purple on the south side of the highway there, and most of them, like I say, stayed in there. There's water kind of in there. We'll see that in a different slide. But over here on the left side, outside of the green blocks there, you can see all the well paths that are in there. Some of them are existing and some of those are reclaimed and no longer producing. And go to the next slide and see what they did. So they went, when I took that virtual fence off that was right in here, they all come over here and you can see all these are the well paths that they hit. The top red corner up there is water, which I had to have them available or access to that. This here was our other water source that they could use. And that spot in the middle was actually a collar that had fallen off and it just sat there repeatedly hitting that same location. It took me a while to figure out what it was, but that's what the spot is in the middle of the collar had fallen off. And once we took the virtual fence off and allowed them to this portion over here, they didn't even want to go back over there. They could have used all of that. They still could have been there, but they didn't. They'd come over here and they'd stay, they'd go with water, they'd come back to there. This is one individual cow that was in that pasture. And this is about 1,400 acres, I think, in the red area. So that cow was in there for a month. She had 1,186 readings that went back. She got shocked one time. So some of these places, like right here, where she come over and she hit the audio zone, she figured out that she didn't want to go past there, and she went back in. All the way around, you can see where she got to the audio zone, either right here or right there is where she got one shock in a month. So she was smart enough to figure out that when you heard that tone, you turned around or you were going to get buzzed. So this was a heat map from a riparian area that Sherry was talking about. It's a little narrow creek that's probably, the creek itself probably 3 foot across or 4 maybe, but, and the willow bottom in the bottom was, I don't know, the width of this room at the most. Something like that. So what we set up here was to try to keep those here, this was cow calf there, so we tried to keep them off of the creek using the virtual fence. And you can see it's not perfect. There's some places in there where they got down on the creek. I left an opening here for them to cross, and I left an opening here for them to cross to north and south through there. So you can see it's not perfect. But it's dang sure better than that right there, if you want to protect the riparian area. And I think the green line is a hard fence, yes. That was a perimeter. This is an individual BLM lot. And these are a couple of pictures I took. This one here is an area where they could get to, and you can see the grass that's kind of all eaten off at the same height, basically, for in that whole area. This over here is a picture that was probably taken 200 foot from that one, where they weren't supposed to be, and you can see the grass in there basically hadn't been touched at all. So kind of what did we learn? Surprise, surprise, the yearlings are not as respectful as the virtual fence as the cows are. We did have like 10 to 15% of the cows. And basically were old cows that had been out on that allotment for years and years and years, knew where the grass was good. And if they figured out a way to go, they would go. So we had like 15% of those that didn't respect the fence very well. But the young cows that hadn't been out there much, they pretty well stayed where they were supposed to be. Our retention, which I know John has talked about, was not great. About 20% of the calories on the cows fell off in 8 months. And on the yearlings, about 1 in 3 came off in 4 months. And every one of them almost, right, the little cable right here just frayed and come apart. And all of the light is so much worse on the yearlings than it was. That's kind of what we learned from our pilot project.
Can get our panel. We're gonna have Amber with BLM, so if you have questions for the BLM, Amber can answer. Troy with the Fish. John's gonna sit up here on the panel, myself and Wayne. And if you have questions, we just ask, Justice or Keller, we'll have a microphone. You just need to speak into the microphone if you don't mind. So that we're trying to record this for folks that weren't able to make it, so. Does anybody have any questions? You guys want to walk around?
I'm pretty loud. I was curious about whether you've got any data on the meat production of the cows in this situation versus the other.
Okay, so that has been brought up and we were trying to figure out how to go about determining if we were able to increase production on the cattle or whatever, get more weight gain. One of the things we have talked about is every year is so varied, it's kind of hard to get a real good idea of exactly what you're going to gain. I mean, you know, kind of an average, but by season, every year, you don't know if they're gaining more because of the collars or losing because of the collars, or is it just that year without, you know, doing a real scientific film, half of them have the collars and half of them not, and all that. But one of the things that we also talked about is the possibility that if you do this rotational grazing, and you can keep them in with these collars a little better, can you get more use out of your pastures to where you might be able to leave them on that pasture longer, to where, you know, especially on the yearlings, if you can leave them on there for an extra 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and you're gonna get 2 pounds a day on them, that's where you're gonna end up seeing the increase in the value of these, I think, is just being able to use pasture longer, to be able to keep the yearlings longer and put more weight on them.
Thanks.
That's a really good question. We did have a study done, I think it was in Oklahoma State, where they looked at an A/B test. So one was the control, those animals were being managed with like traditional like hot wire, poly wire, and then B were the animals that were being managed by the collars, and they wanted to check the stress levels. So they did fecal samples for cortisol levels, and it was essentially the same as the control. So I think one of the things that may, you know, be detrimental to gain would be the cortisol and stress, but it seems like it's the same as if you manage with traditional live wire. So that's just one study that we're more really maybe more.
You can keep asking them, Pete.
Okay, I have another question. This is about the how much exclusion zone could you do? Like we saw that picture where there were all those well pads. Could you potentially set it up so that all those well pads or a portion of those well pads were excluded, or the cows would be excluded?
That's a good question. And one thing, especially the first year, we like to say is like bigger and simpler is better, especially when the animals are starting to hit that learning curve about how to manage having a collar on. So part of that is also we don't want to bait the animals, and if you can prevent them, let's say you're trying to protect like a nice patch of grass. If you can prevent them from even getting close enough to see that, then the baiting and the draw and the pressure from the feed is a lot less. So that always works better. And we say the bigger first year in particular. And then we also want to make sure that we're not creating like a pinball situation where, and usually we're working Forest Service or BLM, you get everybody in the room and then everyone wants to throw an exclusion zone, and all of a sudden it becomes like a pinball arena. And you want to be careful of that, just because all of a sudden you'll lose a lot of efficacy if it gets too complex for the animals out there. We want to be fair to the cow. It's one of the main things that we talk about. So keep in mind that if we're kind of blocking out every individual well, it would probably work best if we just blocked out part of the pasture.
I don't know, this may be part of what you're asking too, I'm not sure. So in these collars, you can program up to 16 of these different virtual fences into one collar with up to, I think it's 100 points. So it's not like you're tied to one little area that's, 6 or 8 or 10 points around there. You can put 16 fences in if you wanted to manage it that way to where you can turn it on a certain day and off a certain day and go to the next one.
So I just had one more, and that was, given the size of some of the BLM allotments and the season of use sort of issues that I know the range funds have to deal with. I was wondering if you're anticipating using more of these on some of those allotments where you don't want to put it.
For sure, Keith. I mean, that's what I think, optimally, I'm excited about is for us to be able to have more control for grazing in some of these early spring or early growing season allotments, but be able to defer within that allotment without completely excluding that allotment. So finding, building a rotation system within, that doesn't require a new fence, but will give us some of that rest and deferment that we know we need.
Good, I agree.
Do you think that animals that are trained to polywire would be more respectful of the vents? And did you have any of your animals trained to polywire prior to the study?
So we have used electric fence in quite a few different places and most of what we have has been exposed to an electric fence. It's kind of a different situation because with the electric fence, they actually have a visual deal that they can see is there. These virtual fences just out in the middle of nowhere, they don't know it's gonna show up. So I don't know that it's exactly the same, but they do learn where it's at. They learn what that toe is, and it's time to turn around. For the most part, it works pretty good. I don't know if Ms. Bunny worked on that.
Just anecdotally, I can tell you that the folks that have their animals like really broke on hot wire train faster and they have better efficacy early on. That's just anecdotally from the folks that we've heard. And the more seriously you can take that training period, the better efficacy you're gonna have. And the more you can do over the period of a couple of years to make sure those animals stay trained rather than pick up bad habits, again, the better efficacy you're gonna have. You have some folks that, they're running the time, the spring, so they just turn their animals out and train them on the allotment and they get efficacy, like it works out right, but not nearly as well as if you take that training period seriously. And again, it's 4 to 5 days. It's actually pretty quick. And 100, 200 acres, hard fence line, up to 500, just small enough so that they have some room to bounce around, but that they're gonna head up on those hard fence lines. That works really well. And the joke that CK, our customer success team, she's the one that teaches producers how to use software, continual troubleshooting and all that. She said it takes 4 days to train the animals and a month to train the producers. So it's some funny sort of anecdote that we have about the training period.
I resent that.
He's really good, huh?
So I know one of the things that we happened when we implemented this was to help to be fair to the cows that were the colors being used on. So in a common grazing allotment where you have different producers and let's say that like your cows had the collars on them, but somebody that you grazed with didn't, and so their cows are going where they want to go. What's the likelihood that that's going to really cause those that have the collars to say, oh, wait a minute, they're going, I'm going, and just go through it. So in other words, how big of a percentage of those cattle that are in the allotment really need to probably have the collars on to make it effective? 100%, 80%?
The more the better. And that is the problem. When we first started out, they were on the 15,000 acres where we kept them in the 1,400 acres. Ours were the only ones there. We weren't combined with any other cattle at that point. Later in the season, when we did combine with some other people up there, doesn't work, if it does just like what Tim was saying, that they see the neighbors are going, and so they want to go too. And it doesn't work nowhere near as well if you don't have the majority of those callers.
I completely agree with that. If we're in pooled allotment, we definitely want to have all the animals collared. It's just the pole and the natural form of pressure to be great. And we see that as well with collar retention early on. Like, let's say you have 5% of your collars come off. You still have really good efficacy. You can still put most degrees in where we want it most of the time. It's really when you start to get to maybe like 15, 20, 30% of those collars that come out. Those animals that don't have collars will realize pretty quickly they don't have pressure, and they'll kind of step herd out and go do their own thing. And again, start to pull really hard in the rest of the herd's efficacy. So we're working on more pool allotments in the future, and the way that the system works, this doesn't come up, but a base station will listen to all callers. So think about it like your cell phone. So we're all probably using the same cell tower right now, but only I can see my text and only you can see yours. And if I'm driving down the street, I just ping from one cell tower to the other, and I never know the difference. It just works. So it's the same thing with callers right now. So we have a lot of projects with Forest Service and BLM where those agencies will provide like a network infrastructure, we call it. They'll set up those base stations. You can also call it the field of dreams approach if you feel that they will come in Eagle County. So Christy Wallner, the BLM calls it, but basically they allow the producers to purchase the collars and plug into that existing network. Basically the barrier to entry a lot of times is those base stations, so it works really well in public lands. And then those producers all have their own collars, they're all plugged into their own system. And if they're running on their own lot, then they only ever see their data. What we are going to work on in the future, and we don't have a great solution for it yet if we want to, where we can have like a parent sort of situation where it's, let's say it's the North LaBarge allotment and then 10 producers fall under it. They each have 100 callers, 200 callers, 300 callers, whatever. But we can set up like a master account where we can say, hey, everybody got together, they all agree this is what we want the virtual custom to be for this part of the year. And we could push those instructions to all of those callers, but those individual producers will still only see their own. So we're thinking about as we move into more pooled allotments, that's something we definitely want to do. And a lot of foresters and game allotments are pooled. We'll start to work on that to top percent. Yes.
I have a question. How many of you experimented with the electrical shock personally? Did anybody? And also, is it like electric things, or is this like real, like a nasty rock thing?
Well, I asked myself that question for a long time. One day I was out checking those yearlings, I picked up several collars that had fallen off, and I just had them on the footboard of the four-wheelers I was driving around. And I got over next to where I had one of those virtual fences set up, and I could hear the collar down there beeping by my feet. But I didn't know which one it was. And that's when I thought, okay, I'm gonna try it, and I'm gonna see just exactly what this thing does. So I got out away from where the virtual fence was set up, and I grabbed the collar and what was I did this from the box, but I knew it would be a shock because I knew the shock would change. I was just walking towards where the audio zone should be, just getting the collar work, and I got it beat, so it was working. I thought, okay, I know I've got like 25 meters before I get shocked. Grabbed a hold of it on the stage. I started getting over towards where it's in shock. Like I say, I knew I had 25 meters, so I wasn't too worried just yet. Well, the next audio tone I got the shock too. And it's substantial. It didn't take me long to throw that collar to the ground.
Is it adjustable?
No.
Because, well, I just think that a lot of cattle, they're creatures of habit. It doesn't seem like they would need that much. They got it.
Great question. So the collar itself is 800 volts in an animal skin model, but then there's all sorts of variation with humidity, temperature, that type of thing. It's basically designed to be immersive, and we actually find that most of the time, those animals are cueing predominantly off of the audio cue, if you can see some of the data that Wayne put up on the screen earlier. So that's great. We're trying to cue off the audio as much as we can. And then the shock itself, it's not necessarily like the voltage that's adjustable, it's the duration of the shock. So the shock right now is a half second, and it's always associated with beep. So it's half second beep, half second nothing, half second shock, 4.5 seconds nothing, and we cycle through a few times before we time it out again for like animal health safety in those situations. But the idea is to train the animals really well and have them cue off the audio predominantly.
So have you tried this?
I haven't personally tried it. I think I probably should at this point, but I can say that our engineer and our CEO Frank, each version of the collar they've taken it. And if this is again version 2.5, if there one these that were even earlier than that, they put it on their leg and basically taken the shot on each one. And I actually find it interesting. I think it's the same thing with animals. There are certain people that have different tolerances for shock. So some animals seem to not be as bothered by it as other animals, and then some people seem to be not as bothered by it, which is really interesting. There may be some variation in how well people tolerate that.
So just a little bit more. When I first started thinking about doing this, I called to some of these other producers that had used these things in the past. And I was talking to one guy, and he told me that he said, if you're ever walking around or whatever right now in the pasture, and you pick up one of them collars, he said, whatever you do, he said, don't hang that across your side of the horn. Sometimes experience probably will teach you a lot more than sitting somewhere learning something. I don't know if he got the primary shock or if he got the secondary, but he wasn't going to do that again. And also, what he was saying about how the animals react differently. When we first started on these training fences, I knew exactly what time it was supposed to come on, and I knew there was cows where they were going to get shot. So I went down there to Ranger, and I was just sitting there watching and waiting for the time to get there when the colors turned on. And when it did turn on, I was sitting there watching them cows, and one of them, you know, I noticed she just kind of shook her head like that, and that was it. And I thought, well, you know, that's not a natural movement. I'm assuming that's what did it, but I don't know. And a little bit later, there was another one there that acted just like she touched the electric fence. She actually jumped and jumped away from it. So, you know, right there, there's seeing how they react differently. I don't know if they're, why it was like that, but they do react different.
And again, from the design side of the collar, it's designed to have less voltage than a traditional poly wire, and it's designed to be aversive, right? Not unbearable by any means, the reversive stimulus, and it's always presented alongside that audio cue so the animals have the ability to move away from that pressure zone. And then we have timeouts for animal health safety as well in case they get or confused in those pressure zones. The collar will turn off, and then you have to go into software and turn that back on, and it's built out from an animal health safety perspective.
Question.
So it sounds like you've got, things going on BLM and forest system lands. What would you say the biggest differences you've seen in the use of this across public lands, so between forest and BLM? Obviously, forest is heavily timbered. You've got some other things going on there that you don't have in these big weather landscapes. So just things that you've noticed or that you've learned so far.
Good question again. BLM and Forest Service actually is a really good use case for us, just because it's big acreage that's really difficult to fence and really difficult to manage the way that you want to at that scale. I think we're not as good a fit for the irrigated type ground or stepping hot wire right now. The technology is just not there to manage that type that effectively. So we've actually learned in going commercial over the past couple of years that we're a really good fit for Forest Service and BLM. Sometimes it's a situation where the topography can really benefit us. Say we're working with the Forest Service, we can put base stations up high on top of peaks and we get really good coverage and things work out great. And then again, sometimes in Forest Service, it's a lot of canyons, a lot of elevation change, but not necessarily a high point that looks down into all of that. That's where the situation becomes difficult. And one thing that we've they're really excited about and like to see working with the Forest Service and the BLM and other state agencies is there's folks that would like to see management across different land ownerships. And a lot of folks will start on private ground, they feed, then they'll move to BLM in the spring, then they'll go up to Forest Service in the later summer and into the fall. So a lot of our projects are actually working with folks that graze on different types of public land. And we love when we're able to build a network infrastructure that covers all those different land ownerships. Really good example of that is in Salida, Colorado, and then just south of the pass, there's Senator Christos and that big, huge beach that just rocketed up out of the valley on both sides, and it's all BLM ground down low. So we just started the info phase of that project just last year with a couple BLM producers and a Forest Service producer, but we've already lit up a whole big chunk of the valley. So ideally, what we'd love to see in the future is producers just put the collars on their home ranch, they train, they're able to move on the BLM and manage with the collars, and then they're able to move up onto the forest and manage with the collars. And they don't even have to think about base stations, they're just thinking about collars and then managing and breathing on that landscape holistically.
Talk about going through the trees as opposed to.
Oh, yeah, so you do want to position the base station on like a whole spot of a peak. If you want to allow those radio signals to be like propagate out. It's not necessarily like the tree itself that is curving radio signals, it's really the moisture content in that tree. It's called clutter, just like buildings are clutter when you're talking about cell phone signals in a city. So we really want to be able to put a base station up high and look down into the canyons or down into the valley. That's typically the best situation from a coverage perspective. And then we want overlapping coverage so we can build a really robust network. The engineers tell us that a caller should be able to communicate with 2.5 base stations at any given time. We don't typically hit it in the field. That's a really strong network, but it's something to strive for. And then when you do have that strong network, again, you're going to get more consistent location data coming off that caller, so it's closer to real time. And then when you send a new instruction to that caller, it's going to pick it up faster. So we have a lot of trees. We typically try to build a stronger network just so we give that caller a better chance of getting its message received.
See an increase of collar loss in timber rangelands?
I don't know that for sure. And they got to where the timber was, they've been on it for quite a while, so we had already lost some. I think it's just a more variation than where they were.
Were you able to find all the colors that you lost?
I was not able to find all the colors that I lost, because at some point they don't send a signal out. Some of them were not working when they fell off. Some of them, like the one I showed on there, was still working. You can get on the program and get a GPS location, and it's pretty accurate. I was able to drive the one that we're working. I picked up every one that I knew was working that I could get a location on. Some of them, like I said, I was driving the Ranger around looking for them. I stopped at one place and collars was 75 feet where I stopped. So as long as the collar's working, yeah, you can find it, and it's pretty accurate.
Another question I have is, so in one of the pastures that we run in North Labarge, there's a portion of it that runs in borders with the forest, and it's not fenced there between the BLM and the forest. And there's a certain number that's permitted to be on the forest. Two of the committees have permits to be on the forest, one does not. But of the two that do, they only have, certain number of AUMs up there, so not all of them are to be up there. Even if all those cows had the collars, probably the efficacy of using that as a means to let some go up there, to say, stop the producer who doesn't have the permits to keep his cows down, and some of the other ones down, it probably wouldn't be that effective because if they're used to going up there and say 30% of the cows are headed up there, others are probably going to just blow through it as well. I mean, some will stay, obviously work on some, but would you say that would probably not just a foolproof way to keep them more up there? So.
I would agree, it's not, it's basically gonna be the same as some of them have collars and some of them not having collars. If you're gonna allow some with collars to go through there, it's a little different than letting them through without a collar. So I don't know that it's gonna be great, it might be better than what we have now, but it probably is not gonna be 100% for sure.
And there might be more opportunities to switch up the rotation, right? Like, so if you have a certain piece of acreage and a certain season of use, and you know that you're gonna be in there, it could be that those herds are managed separate of each other to where it can work, because in some cases, I think the landscape would then lend some help, right? And you could hold some back while the others go. And really, the virtual fence isn't necessarily gonna take me out of the picture. It's not supposed to. You can't do that actually. And so I think you're still gonna have to be on the landscape. You still have to go gather the road ones that bust through the fence and push them back up into it. To really get the fence to work the way that you want it to, right? But I do think that you don't just want to say it's not gonna work because we've not tried necessarily. But I think it's also going to continue to require us to think out of the box about what that looks like. I mean, there are some allotments where they are common and maybe some producers, and they're big. These are all big allotments, right? 100,000 acres is not my backyard. Like, so I think you can find alternatives to where you turn out and then how you're moving through that allotment to make that work within those common allotments. And it'll take work, it'll take cooperation, and it'll take a will to want to do it. But I think if those three things align, then I don't know that it wouldn't work. And I wouldn't want to say that it would. Until we try it. And then you just can't tell me a liar.
I can touch on that too. Well, we're pretty open to, we experiment every year to see what will work and doesn't, and we learn things from producers every day. And not to say we don't want to take what we've learned and try and set ourselves up for success, but we're really open to learning and experimenting as well. Because this is a new technology, and we're one company among a few that are working on it, or specifically the big rangeland handler, but we're in kind of the first and second thing, and we like to think of this as like the bag phone, the original, right? And we're working on that right now, and the next version will be that Nokia brick that you can play Snake on, and then we'll have flip phone, and we'll have really cool Motorola Razr, and eventually we'll get to the iPhone, but this is still very early versions of the technology that we're continuing to explore and develop and learn.
So do we expect that the cost, do you expect that the cost over time is when there used to be more of them, more companies getting into it, other things, that the costs are gonna go down, that the annual cost that it's gonna be to, and then again with those collars, when you get one, it's, you said had to earn $40, that's per cow. Is that, once you have those collars until something drastic happens to them, that they're busted or lost, or is that gonna be something you're going to continue to replace every year?
Yeah, great question. So the way that it's set up right now is that subscription model I mentioned. So it's $40 per collar per year. That again includes all software, all the customer support. And the nice thing about it is it includes a working collar. So if you have a collar that busts or breaks or any changes, we're going to replace that collar at no fee, which is really nice, versus the alternative, which is purchasing that collar outright. We don't even offer that right now. And part of the reason is because these collars are changing very quickly. For example, this is the old retention style that's changing every year. We had a little door vent on the battery door here, which was supposed to allow humidity out of the battery compartment and prevent water from getting in, but unfortunately it was letting too much water in. So we replaced the battery door with a new one. So these collars are changing really consistently. And whenever you have a collar that breaks, or if there's a known issue that we need to do a collar refresh, we'll send this out because it's, again, in our best interest as well as yours to have the latest version of a collar in the field. Not to say you're gonna have the latest all the time, but if there's any really glaring problems with the collar, we typically fix that to make sure you have a working collar. And then long term, like next version, E3, we really want to have the lifespan of the collar be about 4 to 5 years. We do not make money off the collar first year, barely break even going on, so we're developing again, these collars. So in terms of the pricing strategy, I don't really see it changing over the next couple of years. You know, typically what happens in business, if there's more competition than enters the market and scalability of technology, typically it does, but there's just kind of axis, right, where we as a company developing technology need to be able to make some money, and then there needs to be a price point that's adoptable to the producer where they actually get a return on their investment of the collar. And we think 40 bucks is a pretty good starting point there, not to say it's not gonna change, but for the folks that we've been working with, they're being able to derive our office out of it, which is great, and that's the idea, again, trying to get at that point where we as a business can actually have viable, companies to go and continue to develop this. Yes.
I'm wondering how many, is this a widespread young technology? I mean, it's young, but is it widespread? And I just envision absolute misuse of this kind of technology, like keeping all the kids on school ground, or, you know.
I would be, on animals other than, or things other than cows.
Yeah, like people, or I just can see, are there any protections in your industry against abuses?
Yeah, so I'll start from the beginning there. Vence was founded in 2016. We had a running pilot program for 3 or 4 years where we were developing the technology, and just at the beginning of 2022, we went commercially available, and we went from a couple thousand dollars in the field to about 30 or 40,000 now. And this is across predominantly the American West, but we also operate in Australia with some of the bigger companies there. We have, I would say, probably 150 individual producers that we work with across the American West. And we also have a whole bunch of Forest Service offices, BLM offices that we partner with on projects, and lots of state agencies. So we have liberty now, which is nice. Over the next couple of years, we don't need to sell too many collars, so we have the opportunity to pick and choose the right producers. So we're able to vet out the project, we do an RF plan, and we determine what the use case is. And it's really important as we're laying the foundation for the growing young technology to pick the right producer at the right time, who's excited about it and has the right use case. And those are the projects that we're going after right now. We say, if you don't want it to work, it's not gonna work. If you want it to work, we're gonna make it work. So that's why it's very important for us to pick the right customers right now. And I would say we have, usually if someone was planning to put the collars on anything other than animals, that typically would come up in the conversation, and we would not sell anything to them system-wise.
So let me say this. So the producer is 100% in charge of what this thing is doing. So if you got some sadistic guy out there wanting to torture his cows, he probably can. But I don't think the majority of people that are in charge of the livestock are trying to do that. It's a tool to use, but the person that the cattle belong to is the guy who's in charge of it. So whatever happens to his stock, he did.
That's, yeah, I wasn't thinking so much of him as cattle and producers, as the technology being kind of hijacked.
Well, and Joy, so the towers have to be assigned to the collars. And you can't do that without a Vence representative helping you to do that. In addition, like the contract that the district can do events, when we order all the materials, there is in there, you know, the 30 pages, or whatever, there is animal health, there's a kind of, I don't know, it's not a power or whatever, but it's basically, yeah, it's service level agreement, but it says in there that like, we are not, you basically agree that you're not using it to abuse livestock. And that is in that agreement, and I remember having to read that, it's a whole page all by itself, and so there are certain protections of that. As far as it getting hijacked, like if somebody were to have a bad thought about it or whatever, and they were gonna go say, I'm gonna hijack Wayne's tower and go use it, like, I'm not sure that they could do that. I don't think that's even possible, because they would need the components all together to be able to do that. I'm not sure that you could get past even level one with the virtual fence representatives.
Thank you. You understood what I was trying to say.
Okay, all right, good. Does anybody else? Good, great.
What's next for the BLM and NRCS and Forest Service? What's planning looking like in Sublette County for the next couple of years?
Anybody want to do more events? I think, we've been kicking around, we did the pilot, right? We had some money we were kicking around. We wanted to try it just because we needed. Why not, right? Well, it's another alternative. I think everybody's heart and natural resources anyway is really towards land stewardship, and then how can we do the best job possible? Like, how can we be awesome at range management in Sublette County? And although, like, we're already doing a pretty good job, like, you can always get better, right? So I think we've been talking about developing some level of an incentive program, potentially going after more funding. If funding becomes available, continuing the pilot. All of the towers that we purchased with this project, some of you may know, but the district currently like borrows equipment, right? We have a corral system you can borrow, we have an aerator you can borrow, we have cedar you can borrow. In the same instance, we would be doing the same thing with these towers. So if a producer were interested and they wanted to use 1, 2, or 3 towers, we work with Vence, we get the RF plan, they establish how many towers we need, and if we can provide some, and the producer, like right now, we don't have a lot of money. It'd be cool if we did, but we don't. And so if money did become available, though, I think that would be something we would look at doing initially first, right? Because that is a big investment, like you have 3 or 4 towers or whatever for your property. That is a big investment if you don't know you're going to continue this for your lifetime, like, or even for the next 10 years, 5. So I think that's really the initial thought is like, let's just let people try it, get big toe wet, and then see if you like it, see if it works for you in your operation and things like that. And I think that's our biggest interest in that is like, let's just see how many producers like it and they want it, then they can take it the next step further. But we'll still provide those towers as we're able so that we can enable people to try it. Do you guys have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I'll look at something on the funding side. There's plenty of funders out there that are willing to move forward with this type of a project. And we're just beginning to see that interest from producers. And that's both federal funds, private dollars, and it's along the lines of this incentive type programs. So if we see the interest, I think this group here can help move that forward and see some of those additional funds. But yeah, it really boils down to what the community is receptive to.
And I will just add to that, like, just because my curiosity drives me mostly. I have talked to the Vence about doing a bigger like plan, like infrastructure plan. Like, what does that look like in terms of loading through, right? Like if I had 10 locations that I absolutely knew that I could put a permanent tower, how much coverage would I get out of those? And we're going to be meeting here in the next few days to go over that and see what that looks like. A lot of it is existing repeater towers. Say on Forest Service with a deal on there to get coverage, right? And so it kind of seems to me like a natural move forward potentially. And so I've been talking to the forest about working on that and Amber as well, and we'll see where that goes. There's no guarantee. That seems to be like maybe a good move forward, right? So if I can get those repeater locations to cover a good portion of Sublette County, at least the BLM and the lower portion of the forest, then that kind of seems like a no-brainer, right? Because then I know I can go after a grant, it's $100,000, I'll go build a tower, throw it out there, and then voila, like all you do is buy your colors. Or some supplemental towers for your property. Like to me, that it just seems like that might be a good way to go if we can make it work, if it makes sense. And so I think we're going to continue looking into it to figure out if and how it's applicable here. And I think it definitely is. Like we have some pretty great evidence that there is utility on our landscape. on forest, I don't know, we have predator issues that are among some of our stuff, like in the higher elevations that we're still trying to figure out if this is appropriate for that. But right now, I think there are certain parts of the landscape that as well itself nicely to Vence if we can come up with a better plan, that makes sense. And
Yeah, again,
no, go
go,
ahead.
oh, all right. So reduction in gathering times. I'm looking at your Colorado example that you had up there with the perimeter. Can you reduce the perimeter and bring the cattle down off the mountain? Can you give us some examples on that? And then my other question is refresh rates as seeing where the cattle are at. So can you see if they're under duress, stress from predation or anything like that?
Yeah, great question. All right, so I'll answer that first one. So the caller by design will wake up every 30 minutes. It'll send out a message that's a location point from the GPS, and then it'll wait 5 seconds for a response from the base station before going to sleep. So that's our standard GPS location. It's not real time, but all of those different callers in the herd are waking up at different times. So it can give you a pretty good idea as to what's going on. We have a lot of questions about predation in Colorado lately because of the wolf reintroduction and of course up in Wyoming and Montana. We don't have a lot of great examples as to what we've been able to do so far, but I am curious to see what folks' experiences over the next couple of years. I think a couple of opportunities for improvement are, well, let's say there's a known den of a predator or a known area, we could potentially use an exclusion zone, just like we do right here to keep them out of those areas when we know that those animals are in a period when there's a lot more predation. So that's one example. Another one is that if there is a case of predation and the animals are being chased, if they hit the physical infrastructure, typically that can tie them up, and of course that benefits the predator. But if it's a virtual fence line, again, there's layers of pressure. Virtual fencing is not a iron gate. Pressure from a predator is going to be much greater than that. So they could run through that and then not have a physical impediment. I think that's one other benefit. Again, we haven't had experience, but those are just kind of thought experiments so far. And then the final one has to do with location data points. And that's, if you have really good coverage and you have great refresh rates, meaning you have strong base station coverage, a good quality network setup, I think maybe if you're monitoring that often, you will be able to see those animals kind of move quickly or in a way that you don't expect them to. That may give you a clue. We don't have any algorithms or anything to detect any movements like that yet, but maybe that's something that we could potentially work on in the future. I know it's basically what we're going to do with cow alerts in the future. It's all going to be location based, where a guy in South Carolina manages very intensively these animals, really good for software. He can basically see when a cow moves out from the herd, camps out for a day or two, and say, okay, she's calving. So we will basically just write some algorithms to catch those location data points that are doing that and give an alert. Not saying it's going to be 100% accurate all the time, but that's kind of the idea as to how we do that first iteration of health metrics. I got talking for a second. What was the first question? Sorry.
Movement.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So couple examples there. You could do like a step graze where the animals start at high and then throughout the season, they slowly move down. So they're being drawn over by feed pressure or you're pushing them through that one-way gate to the next pasture. That's one example of how folks do that. Second is just using location data points and instead of having 10,000 acres to ride, they're over here and it takes you an afternoon instead of a few days. That's probably the most common situation that we have. And then there's an additional one that's called a movement fence. So we don't pitch this as hard because we want to get away from the idea that we're totally sticking a cow with a horse arm and sticking in a pressure zone. But there's inclusion, exclusion, and then movement. And that virtual fence line can be set up to move at an increment of maybe 10 meters, every hour or so. And you can basically push those animals along. So they'll get that audio cue and move down into a smaller pasture. We're not going to run into the crowd or anything, but the idea is we can shrink down that amount of area that they have to go gather in. And ideally, have location data points as to where those animals specifically are and see if you're missing any animals. And that's really what the benefit and reduction of habitat comes from.
So you can move that fence over a period of time. You wouldn't have to do it
It does it automatically, yeah, there's a certain interval when it pushes. And there are certain situations where it works really well, like if we're pushing animals downhill, works great. Not if pushing animals uphill, the pressure going up is, is too great, and works pretty good on flat too, but we try not to pitch it too hard, just because we don't want to make any promises, but it's a really cool tool and it works well.
So could you adjust that fence line every couple of days? I think that's kind of what you're asking, like have the fence line for, 2 days at this point and then move it
Yes.
a couple of days so that it just, it's slowly over, a 10-day period pushes them down out of the mountain.
Absolutely. And so in the collar itself are called slots. Virtual fence line is made up of a polygon, so it's gonna have at least 3 sides, but it can have up to 16. So it can't be some crazy line, but it's a polygon. And within the collar, it can actually store 16 of those virtual fence lines, so it's 2 16s. So there's not unlimited complexity you can have in the collar, but you can have timestamps on each of those individual ones. So you can update the collar with your next 5 moves. Move 1 happens 5 p.m. tomorrow, move 2 happens 5 p.m. the day after that, and so on and so forth, which is really nice. And then within the software, you can have the 16 virtual fence lines in the collar, but you can have a whole library. You call it like your library virtual fence lines, and then you can check 16 of those out onto the collar at a time. And that collar will update over a period of a couple hours. If you have good connection with the base station, and then you'll see that it's updated and has that virtual fence line.
So, and then part of the trouble with what you're suggesting here is when you move that, you want to jump over cows that aren't going to get moved. You move that virtual fence a 1/4 mile, and you're probably going to pass the cows up. So there's no real guarantee that you can move them down, even like you're suggesting. It may work, but it may not. And another thing that's going to tell you on the predation thing, this collar has an alert that goes out. If that collar hasn't had movement in 24 hours, it'll put an alert out. So if you got something out there that got ate by a bear, you might be able to find it sooner or find it at all in time for you to get the payment, whatever, from the game fish for predation deal. So there's potential there for that also.
I just one more question. So with this pilot program, there was funding for, we've talked about the possibility of, trying to find funding to kind of get it on the ground, get going. At some point in time, the yearly use of it is going to fall on the producer to be able to use it. If a person starts for a while, tries it out, and then it could come to a point that the different agency says, well, this is the way it's going to be, take it or leave it, either use it or get off, type of a thing. So then that cost becomes on us. So the question, I guess, Wayne, having used it with what the cost is, if that cost came out of your pocket today, are you on board to do it again next year if that cost is, you don't have funding, you don't have help from these other agencies or other groups? Are you on board with it? Where are you at with percent, put you on the spot, but there you are.
Well, I figured that was coming. I can't sit here today and tell you that, yes, that thing will pay for itself right now. I can't do that. Potentially, yes, and I see there coming a point in time where in these permits, it's going to be written in there that there's going to be required rest, the rotation, or however you want to call it. And eventually you're going to have to figure out a way to do it. And if that's with riders, as opposed to these, you're never going to get a fence built. I can promise you that. These wildlife people don't want it, the government agencies don't want it, nobody wants a new fence anywhere. So you're going to have to figure out a way to do that. But I can't sit here today and tell you that I could justify putting that collar on a cow to do that right now. If you're up against the fence, and if your permit that's going to be in jeopardy, that's a different story.
We, as a company, have no intention, or we don't want a future where we're being used as an enforcement tool. Like a lot of our early conversations with Forest Service people are, oh, well, we can use this to see if anybody's trespassing. And going right to the Forest Service farmer too, he's in a lot of those meetings with me. He's like, no, like we need to give producers as much grace as possible as they're adopting new technology, especially the first couple of years. And the question that we should be asking is how are we going to use the collars to graze the way that we want to graze that would otherwise be prohibited by labor and infrastructure. And he wants to move away from the old paradigm where you're in X pasture for X number of days and you're off, and have it more dynamic where we're grazing based on what the landscape can handle that year, based on precipitation, based on the number of animals. So really managing the land and using the animals as a tool to improve rangeland ecology. So that's the direction that we want to go in, and we're pretty clear about that. And also from a data perspective, this is just good to know, because typically this comes up. The producers are the end user of the collar, so they own all of the data. We as a company have a license to use that data to like, make the software work and all that, which is pretty standard for a technology company, but under no circumstances are we going to share that data with the BLM, the Forest Service, or anybody else. Even if those base stations are owned by those public agencies, it's all based on who signs the contract, who owns the animals that the collars are put on. And so the producers are able to determine what they want to do with that. You know, some of them will share that information with the range bonds, they have a great relationship, and others will keep that active. So we support the producer from the data perspective at the end of the day.
Beyond perspective?
I don't have any official perspective, but I have heard that same sentiment from our agency as, Forest Services. I think one of the things that I've taken away as we've been working through this the last couple of years is that we can't expect perfection in any of this, and that we're so fortunate in Sublette County that we're part of the development. I mean, we're in the backbone stage, as John said. And so we need to take advantage of that and help to make this technology so that it is applicable to not only us, but, across the West and for public land grazing. I think that that's significant for all of us in this room, for us to be working together and working across ownership boundaries. And in Sublette County with migration as a number one, and just super important habitat, I think we're just a perfect candidate for us to make this work. And I think that's why the agencies locally are willing to do what it takes to try to get this stuff up and running, and let you guys as producers or any producers that are in here use it and make it work for you and help that technology to improve. On the not perfection part, I know Wayne and I talked about it earlier this year. Like, okay, so you had 30% of your collars off. So 30% weren't working at times. But still, you have 100 cows that could potentially be hanging out in the riparian area that you're concerned about. And so maybe there's 30 that kept getting in there. You still have 60 that are not in there. And that's how I look at it, is we need to just take what we can get right now and take any little win we can get and just know that over time it will only improve. Feel like and as a conservation district, I mean, our big motivation, right, is to help the people that own property or do whatever they do in this county, do it well, right? We want to promote really, really healthy lands, because that's what helps everybody survive. And that's going to be long-term sustainability for everyone here. This is just another tool. At this point, we're still in the development phase, and we're just lucky enough to be able to help them develop, right? And so I think, like, right now, also, like, the financial aspect of all that, yeah, it's a lot to bite off and chew, but I think that's why we put our heads together and we figure out, okay, how can we take out some of that initial startup cost so that we can enable people to actually take this on. And I think that is gonna require us all to work together to make it viable in this landscape and for producers to want to have it. And I think there's a lot of other ways that you recoup your costs. I think about the time and effort it takes to gather. Lots of time, I know lots of producers that fly multiple times to try to find the last something wall. I know that there's a lot of pressure from outside entities, right? Like we have livestock on public lands that still remain there well after when they're supposed to be off. Or we don't hit our rotation times in our annual operating instructions or in our management plans, right? We're not necessarily able to do that, but this technology empowers us to do that, which in turn helps to solidify the fact that you are doing the best that you possibly can on your permit and to keep that permit in hands. Right, like permit renewal still gonna be a thing, it's still gonna be talked about, it's still not happening very quickly. But we can still provide these tools that will help keep those things in your hand. Very few livestock permittees or grazers or whatever in this county can survive without public lands and the ability to graze on them. So the more that you can steward your permit, the better off you're gonna be in the long run. And I don't know how much more insurance we can buy for that.
Very, very negative.
All right, thanks, everybody. Have a good night.